We got a big meeting coming up between the presidents of Russia and China. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here. And actually, I wanted to do a show yesterday, but I had a great time. I was in Philadelphia at this, and I learned a lot. It was this Asian Art Center, and they had a discussion on peace in the Korean Peninsula. Very interesting stuff. One of the things, before I get into this, and I think it's important because we're going to be talking about Trump, one of the things that I found interesting that I had no idea about, and that was how positive Donald Trump was. And keep in mind something. I'm not a Trump person. I'm not a Biden person. I always say I try to evaluate international politics as though I was an alien dropped on the earth from an alien ship, because I was. And and at any rate, and I was viewing this, just seeing a bunch of warring tribes, because if you look at the world right now, and if you look at what it's been, the United States and Russia and China and all these other countries, what you end up seeing is a history of warring tribes. And now you have warring tribes that have 21st century weapons and still have a first century intellect and knowledge and mentality. So from that perspective, Trump is just a phenomenon to me, a guy who came out of American politics as opposed to coming into American politics. Now, let me get to this. It's important before I go anywhere with this, and I think you need to know this. It's an important thing. So a couple of things in talking to, and this is pertinent to this because I'm going to get into Trump next, into the potential charges against Trump. What I heard from the Korean community, very pragmatic people, very smart, well-educated, knowledgeable. There were people there who were professors, teachers, what have you, very hardworking people. There were a number of people there who had moved here from Korea and had gotten citizenship, some who didn't have their citizenship yet. So it was a Korean community, very wonderful. They had the Korean dance with their Korean dance and drumming and all this kind of stuff. So it was really a good time. I really enjoyed it. And I was like a member of a panel and a speaker. Here's the thing I found. A very positive view within this community of Donald Trump. Very positive view. They view Trump clearly as a positive force in American politics, unanimously. And there were people here who were professors, people who are in the academic community, people who you would think that, how the academic community is. It's in America. It's like, oh, they're all part of the never Trump, but hate Trump stuff. But keep in mind, when I listened to them, their concern was the Korean Peninsula. Their concern was U.S. aggression against North Korea. Their concern that I heard from people here was a couple of things. One is U.S. propaganda that is currently fed towards the South Korean people to get them to hate the North Korean people. This attempt, and you've heard me do a thing about it, the weaponization of rage. I've done a video about that. This continuous work by the United States empire to feed propaganda to the South Koreans to get them to hate the North Koreans, and that way keep that, enrage them against the North Koreans, enrage them against communism. Communism is evil. The North Koreans are communism. You got to hate communism. You got to hate the North Korea. Their own blood brothers and sisters and cousins, literally members of their families, some of them, right? So that's the game that's being played. But let's not forget something. What is one of the things that Donald Trump did? He went to meet with the leader of North Korea, and he tried to work out a peace deal. And the neocons, Bolton and other people, threw a monkey wrench in it and thwarted him. So from the perspective of a Korean person, guess what? To them, when they look at Donald Trump from a pragmatic position based on their homeland, their position is, this is the first guy who we've seen, who has made an honest effort to bring peace to the Korean Peninsula, to our homeland, where our families are. We're afraid there'll be a war. We're afraid our families will be killed, die in a nuclear apocalypse, et cetera, et cetera. Their families, their loved one, their culture is at risk. They see Donald Trump, the first person to try to make an attempt at peace. They see the neocons thwart him. And from their perspective, I'm telling you right now, they're all voting Trump. If Trump's running, they're all voting Trump. It's clear. So just something I thought, something that I learned that I thought was interesting. I didn't know that, but from a pragmatic perspective in the Korean community, it makes perfect sense. All right, let's continue on with the potential charges against Trump. So what's going on? So what they say is, apparently, this is my understanding of it. We haven't read anything yet. The potential charges against Trump, and this is important. I'm starting off with this because all of these stories are big. So apparently, and I'm going to get to an article that this is about, and to me, it's absurd. It's about Donald Trump. Apparently, now he and Stormy Daniels are consenting adults. So apparently, Donald Trump had some kind of a sexual liaison with Stormy Daniels. She was a porn star. At some point, he ran for president, and he said, look, this is what's being alleged. He said, look, need you to keep your mouth shut. Here's 130 grand. She took the 130 grand and agreed to keep her mouth shut. But apparently she didn't keep her mouth shut for the 130 grand. From a perspective of business people, from a perspective, I'm just going to do this. This is not a moral judgment on some kind of sexual morality. That's not my job here. I would say this. You and me, it's a lawnmower. I'll sell you this lawnmower for $500. Here's the $500. And we shake our hands. I expect you to give me the lawnmower. And when I say, what conditions the lawnmower in? Runs fine. I've been using it all along. Cuts well. Everything's fine. If I make a deal with you, well, look, I tell you what, will you agree that if I get that lawnmower, I can cut my lawn at least 3 times. If it cuts it 3 times clean, you don't have to give me my money back. If it doesn't cut it, if it cuts out within 2 times, you got to give me your money back. Well, you might agree with that or you might not. But whatever that, we shake hands on it. That's the deal. At that point, I got the lawnmower, you got the money. I do 2 cuts, and I'll be honest with you. Hey, man, it worked fine. Boom. All right, we're good. That's the deal. So to me, from a pragmatic business perspective, they had a liaison of some sort, both consenting adults. Forget the morality of it, whether who was married, who wasn't. They're grown. They make a deal. She says, give me 130 grand. I'll keep my mouth shut. Okay. He gave her the 130 grand. From my perspective of business, she should have kept her mouth shut. She was grown. She had sex with the guy. That was her choice. She was a porn star. Let's not try to make it out like she's, a nun by any stretch of the imagination. She's a grown person. He's a grown person. Both of them. She looked at Donald Trump and said, let's face it. She looked at Trump and said, hey, he's got loot. What's in it for me? That's what people do. I'm not judging her either. What's in it for me? Okay. Trump said, man, she's hot as fire. What's in it for me? He wanted something. She wanted something. They did what they did. And everybody walked away happy as far as a business deal. I would suspect that may not be the first time she's been involved in such a business transaction. I could be wrong. But based on her profession, based on the way this went down, and she's a woman, if you see the younger pictures of her, she was beautiful beyond words. So it would make sense to me that based on her profession, that there may have been very wealthy people coming to her saying, let's do that transaction again. And let's do that transaction. But whatever the case, in this particular instance, in my opinion, he gave her the money. They're adults. It's none of my business. But the system is saying, look, Donald Trump did this. And this is what's interesting. He did this to interfere with the election. Right? This was a way to interfere with the election by giving her money to keep her from running her mouth about their sexual liaison. Well, wait a minute. To me, it's stretching it. It is stretching it because he could just as easily say, well, it wasn't about the election. It was about my wife. I don't want her to find out. For God's sake, she'd hit me over the head with something. And what guy who has a girlfriend or a wife or whatever wouldn't look at that and say, a guy may look at it and say, well, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't have. happy with my family. No, that would be wrong. But yeah, you didn't want your wife to find out. All I'm saying is this: that's logical. It is logical argument. If Trump argues, hey, I didn't want my family to find out. I've got a big name person. I didn't want to be disgraced in public. Even if I wasn't running, I would have paid her the money to keep her mouth shut because it wouldn't look good for me to be running around with porn stars. My name would be just besmirched. That would be a logical argument. If I'm sitting on the jury, I'd be like, yeah, you didn't want what's her name to find out, and you didn't want your name to be besmirched. And okay, I couldn't argue that that is interfering with an election. Keep in mind something. At the same time, we have the FBI interfere. Here's interfering with an election. Here's interfering with an election. And this is why I say this is preposterous. This is truly interfering with the election. The FBI gets a laptop, and that is Hunter Biden's laptop, right? They look at the laptop. They see that it's valid. They check it over. They do forensic tests on it, et cetera. So they got this. If they didn't, they should have. They had a responsibility to. So they get this laptop from the president's son, and they see that it is valid. Okay, this is Hunter Biden's laptop. In fact, they get called by a guy at a computer store that says Hunter Biden left his laptop here. I don't want to get in any trouble. Come get it. Now, he had made a copy of the laptop of the hard drive, which he had a right to, because when he tried to get Hunter Biden didn't come back. It became his property, legal property, which means he could copy anything he wanted. It's his. Okay. The FBI gets it. They have it for a year. They know this is Hunter Biden's laptop. They know that it's not the Russian, anything else. So they got the laptop. They know it's valid. They then go to the social media companies, and they deliberately lie to the social media companies. They say to the social media companies, the information on this laptop, we have reason to believe it may be Russian disinformation. But they already know it's not. They know it's valid. They do that, and they say, and if it comes out, the Russians may drop it to interfere with the election. Therefore, we may have to, you guys should be ready to censor all of this stuff. If it comes out, you got to censor it just before the election because it could interfere with the election, and it's the Russians. But they knew that was false when they did it. They knew it was true. It was not true. They knew it had nothing to do with the Russians, and they knew it was all valid. But they lied with malice and a forethought to the media insiders, to the social media insiders. And then they put together this operation where they said 51 retired intelligence officers say it has all the earmarks of Russian disinformation. So the FBI and the intelligence community put together a disinformation operation to discredit the information from the Hunter Biden laptop, even though they knew it was valid. That, my friends, is clear and obvious election interference. They did election interference on behalf of Joe Biden. They did election interference to help ensure that Joe Biden got arrested. So that's election interference. I think it's cut and dried. But Donald Trump paying off a babe that he was sleeping with to keep her from basically ratting him out, that's a stretch. So why are they doing it? Are we to believe that they're like, hey, there's a crime here that must be dealt with immediately? Well, we can't have such a thing. Election interference. Why? We can't have that. Let's take a look at something here. And we'll figure this out real quick before we move on. What are they trying to do? All right, let's go to Reuters. What could happen next? That's the key. All right, they say Trump could be charged in New York and blah, blah, blah for covering up hush money payments to a porn star during his campaign 7 years after the money changed hands. 7 years. We'll wait 7 years. Hey, he gave her money. Okay. Any trial could be more than a year. Listen to this. Could be more than a year away, legal experts say. It certainly will. And could, here's the key, coincide with the final months of the 2024 presidential campaign. That's all this is about. If you look at it and you say to yourself, I don't see how you get a conviction on this unless you go to New York and you get like Hillary Clinton's family, which probably is the plan, to go in there and get all Trump hating neoliberals, and then guarantee yourself a conviction. And then eventually it may get up to the Supreme Court. It could get thrown out. I don't know. But the bottom line is this: they don't care. This is not about a conviction. This is about this trial coinciding with the final months of the 2024 presidential campaign, right? They said the evidence that he gave 130,000 to porn star Stormy in the waning days of the 20,000 presidential campaign in exchange for her silence about an affair. Again, he's married. That's just as good a reason as any, right? They accused Daniels, but Trump has denied the affair, and his lawyers accused Daniels, whose real name is Stephanie Clifford, of extortion. I don't think it was extortion either. I think they just made a deal. Hey, man, I need you to keep your mouth shut. 130 grand and it's done. Here you go. We're all adults here. The average criminal case in New York takes more than a year to move from indictment to trial. So it's going to take a long time. That raises the possibility of Trump having to stand trial in the middle of the 2024 presidential campaign, or even after election days. You see what I mean? It's the new version, the latest version of Russiagate. What a shock. When Trump was running before, they ran this thing, oh, he's loving Russia and Russia, and boom, we got to go with that. So now, oh, he's being charged. They don't care what he's being charged with. They'll run it day and night. Trump is being charged, therefore he's evil and he must be stopped, right? Or putting a president on trial for state charges would enter uncharted legal waters. If elected, he would not hold the power to pardon himself of state charges. Again, state charges. How terrible are these? It's like charging somebody. You know, I was in law enforcement. I walk up and I walk by, some guy spits on the sidewalk. It's written in the law that it's illegal to spit on the sidewalk. It is certainly illegal to spit on the sidewalk, right? But I would never stop and arrest somebody or give them a ticket for spitting on the sidewalk because it's preposterous. Let me throw this out there. You remember a guy named Herman Cain? What happened with Herman Cain? It came out, and Herman Cain was taken out by operatives within the Republican Party because they were afraid he didn't get into having too much success, if you want the truth. But Herman Cain, they found out that he had a babe on the side. And she was a pretty girl, which shockingly, the man was a millionaire. He was very, very rich. He had a wife. If you remember, his wife didn't say much. His defended him. Why? I don't know if you ever been around rich people, and I have. It ain't all that unusual for some millionaire rich guy to have a hot babe on the side. It's not like the people in the community of wealthy people are all grabbing their chests, flopping to the ground saying, well, I've never seen that before. In fact, in some circles, it's almost expected. If you remember, what did Herman Cain's wife say? Did she like, oh my God, I can't? No, she was just kind of like, hey, that's my husband and I love him. Why? She knew in her circles it wasn't the most unusual thing in the world. He had some chick on the side. She was gorgeous. He was paying her bills. They interviewed her and she was like, well, he's very, very nice and he helps me out. And that's what happens. That's really the way it happens. She's pretty. He's got money. He's rich and he has a baby on the side. We could judge it morally. We could make questions. We could discuss it. But it's like like some women are married to a professional athlete and they know that all the women are chasing after this professional athlete. And then they find out that like he had an affair with someone and they're like, oh my God. And a lot of people are like, well, you know, you were married to a guy that's quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers or whatever. You kind of got to think that when he travels from city to city, the babes are standing outside their hotels throwing their panties at his window. You know what I mean? I mean, let's be honest, those kind of things are happening. We may not think they're right, but that's reality. And when people marry into those circles or go into those circles, they know the rules. They know the rules, right? And they know how things work out. So that's why I say that was between Trump and his wife. It ain't none of my business. If they can live with it, fine. If she says, I don't like that and I want to leave, fine. But the idea that we got to have some moral judgment or we got to turn it into, oh, he did a terrible thing and relate it to the election. What is it, a misdemeanor? I think, for God's sake. At any rate, the New York case is one of several focused on Trump, including a Georgia election interference probe, a pair of federal investigation into his role in January 6th, and on and on. Retention of classified documents. Yeah, well, we see how that one fell apart because it's the same things. By so here's the bottom line. It's called lawfare. It is Alex Saab. I don't know. People should look at the Alex Saab SAAB case. He was a Venezuelan diplomat that was traveling around the world helping Venezuela because of food sanctions from the United States. He was traveling around, going to other countries and helping find food for people to get around the sanctions, to help find food to get to Venezuela for the poor. They had a plan called, they have a plan in Venezuela called their CLEP program, where they have food that they help for the poor. He was helping to find food for the poor in Venezuela. The United States illegally arrested him because he's a diplomat and he has diplomatic immunity. Illegally arrested him, brought him to the United States. The guy has cancer. They won't even give him cancer treatment in prison. So it's lawfare. It's Julian Assange. Julian Assange exposes what the U.S. does. They go after him, say he violated the law. It's lawfare. That's what it is against Trump. This is lawfare. It is utilizing the law as a method of warfare. And that's all this is. It's irrelevant. It tells you right here, we got several cases against Trump. They're looking at him for this. They're looking at him for that. You know what? I put it like this. When I was a cop, if I pull you over and say you were speeding, okay, you don't have a seatbelt on, write your ticket for that. Oh, okay. Oh, wait a minute. Let me measure the tread on your tires. Oh, you have less than a 16th of an inch. They're illegal. Oh, let me go check. Oh, your tag light's out. Ticket after ticket. And I write you 8 tickets, everything I can possibly find. It's obvious that it's not the violations or the tickets. What's going on at that point is I'm mad at you or angry at you for something. Right. Fine. And then people go to court and they're like, hey, Officer Nixon wrote this person, blah, 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 blah. And now this guy also happens to be dating Garland Nixon's girlfriend on the side. I wonder if the two things are what if those two things are connected? Almost like he had a vendetta. When you see this kind of extreme investigation, the 6-7 investigations against Trump, it's obviously lawfare at this point, and it will destabilize the country. And might I add this, it will guarantee that Trump will win the primaries in a blowout. That's what it will do. It will guarantee it, because they're trying to use a way that they're trying to use something outside of the electoral system to stop Trump from winning. That's all it is. The entire system is like, we got to stop Trump. That's what it is. All right. And I think that is important. And let's move on to our next concern. And that obviously would be the point of the ICC, the International Criminal Charges against Putin. Let me find, I should have found this before. Just in case you didn't know, the Hague Invasion Act. I'm going to find this for you. How does the United States view the U.S. criminal court? Right? Or they're like, hey, we've got to support the U.S. the criminal court, the U.S. Hague Invasion Act, right? So this is a law that is 2002 under George Bush, which is intended. It signed into law the American Service Member Protection Act of 2002, which is intended to intimidate countries that ratify the treaty for the ICC. The new law authorizes listen to this, the use of military force to liberate any American or citizen of a U.S. allied country. So if you are a U.S. member, a person in the U.S. or American citizen, not just military, a citizen of a U.S. or U.S. allied country, that includes the U.S. empire, all of the countries of Australia, of Canada, and all the vassals. The U.S. or its vassals, right? So this law authorizes use of military force to liberate any American or citizen of a U.S. allied country being held by the court, which is located in The Hague. This provision, dubbed the Hague Invasion Clause, has caused a strong reaction from U.S. allies around the world, particularly in the Netherlands, where The Hague is. So the U.S. says, we have a law. Any American citizen, we're going to war with the Netherlands. We're going to use the military. Any American citizen, if they've committed a genocide, doesn't matter what they've done. The U.S. does not recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, so much so that the U.S. says if, in fact, American citizen, not an American politician, not an American service member, not a U.S., not an ally, any citizen of France, Germany, United States, Australia, Canada, whatever, United States can attack the Netherlands, bomb the hell out of them, kill everybody in the damn city, and attack the court and take it. That's how much our country cares about it. In addition, the law provides for the withdrawal of U.S. military systems. Listen to this: assistance from countries ratifying the ICC treaty, and restricts U.S. participation in United States peacekeeping unless the United States obtains immunity from prosecution. At the same time, these provisions can be waived by the president on national interest grounds. So what they're saying is this: screw it. We hate the ICC. If you ratify the ICC treaty, we ain't even going to give you money or we'll communicate with you. But since we go by the rules-based order, which means we can do anything we want to, if we decide not to, we can in a given case. So what they're saying is, basically, this is the rules-based order. If somebody from France or Germany or England or the US or Australia or Canada goes to the US, goes to The Hague, we'll kill everybody there and take them back. If somebody from a country we doesn't like does it, well, now then we'll be like, hey, we can, national interest grounds, right? The states that have ratified this treaty are trying to strengthen the rule of law. The bishop said, the director of the International Justice Program and Human Rights Watch, the Bush administration is trying to punish them for that. Dicker pointed out many of the ICC's biggest supporters are fragile democracies and countries emerging from the human rights crisis, blah, 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 right? So now listen to this. However, another provision of the bill allows the United States to assist international efforts to bring to justice those accused of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, including efforts by the ICC. So you see what I mean? So the U.S. says, we don't recognize it. You take one of our guys, we'll kill everybody there. We'll bomb it. We'll murder people. We control the ICC. We'll cut money off. We'll do everything horrible. And if anybody tries to go after us or any of our allies with the International Criminal Court of Justice. However, we can also assist international efforts to bring those to justice accused of genocide, blah, 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 blah. But wait a minute. So if it comes to the U.S. and its allies, we can literally kill and bomb and murder every freaking body in that country, which is an ally, the Netherlands, in order to get them out of that court, to get them out, break them out, and bring them home. But if it's somebody else, well, we can, in that case, we can just certainly assist them with going after the people that we like. That is how hypocritical. See, Dicker said the law gives the administration discretion to override this act's noxious efforts on a case-by-case basis. Right? So, what are we looking at? It's the rules-based order as usual. It's a fraud. It's false. It's the U.S. saying when it comes to the International Criminal Court, we will not allow them to have jurisdiction over us and our allies. However, if they're going after somebody that we don't like, we reserve the right to assist them and support them all we want, as long as it's somebody that we don't like. It's nothing but U.S. imperialism. It's nothing but another fraud. This is something that we can use to smite our enemies, but it can't be used against us. Imagine that. Doesn't it come back to what I just came from? And that is the FBI can literally lie, cheat, and steal in order to interfere with the 2020 election, right? We can lie to people. We can do anything we want to interfere with the election. Donald Trump paid off a babe that he had a liaison with, which could just as likely be to keep his old lady from finding out as anything else. He has to be held accountable for it. Rules for thee and not for me. And now we go to what's happening with this so-called crime, the International Criminal Court, which the United States doesn't recognize, and Russia doesn't either. And do you see why when people say, why doesn't Russia recognize it? Why would they? Why would you recognize a court where the United States says we'll kill everybody in the area if they try to go after one of our people, but we'll be happy to assist them if they go after one of our enemies? Of course, Russia's not going to. That's absurd. They just see that it's another tool of U.S. imperialism. So now the ICC, shockingly, amazingly, in the U.S., according to this, I guess they'll support him, says Vladimir Putin's involved in terrible and evil things, right? That he helped kidnap children. I remember a guy named Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, just throwing that out. He helped kidnap children from the war zones in Donbass and cart them off to Russia or wherever the hell, right? Keep in mind something. When the war started, the Ukrainians were bombing and killing the children, and they still are. So they're shelling the Donbass, killing children, bombing, using weapons, money, and everything else supplied by the United States at the behest of the United States, and not a war crime there. Not a war crime. Thousands of children, adults, men, women, innocent civilians slaughtered. Thousands. Over probably, I've heard numbers anywhere from 10 to 18,000 civilians slaughtered by the Ukrainians using shells. No international criminal court charges there. But the war starts. And in my opinion, the Russians facilitated people leaving a war zone. Kids, what are they supposed to do? Stay around and wait for the bombs to drop? So they facilitate people, in my opinion, that's the way I view it, leaving the war zone. And now they're like, well, that's illegal. We can't get people out of a war zone. Children got to stay there. But, well, how come there's not more children in Bakhmut? What about the kids in Bakhmut? They should be able to stay there throughout the battle. Just seems to me like it doesn't make a lot of sense. But now there's charges against Putin in the International Criminal Court of Justice, which the U.S. doesn't recognize, and neither does Russia. Now, what is that about? Oh, it was just a preemptive strike. The Chinese are heading to the Chinese president, Xi Jinping. This is the reason I'm doing all of this, and I'm putting all this together because there is a continuity, shall we say, to these actions, right? There is a continuity to it. I want to start with Trump and demonstrate that what was going on against Trump was simply lawfare. I wanted to go to Putin and show that the United States is, I would like to say, inconsistent when it comes to lawfare with the criminal justice, with the International Court of Criminal Justice, but or the International Criminal Court, the ICC, whatever the hell it is. But the United States is not inconsistent. It's very consistent. It's imperialism. It says we can do whatever the hell we want and nobody else can. And we can use this tool to go after people that we don't like, but they can't use it to hold our people accountable. All quite actually consistent, devious, but consistent. Okay, President Xi and President Putin are meeting, I believe, on Tuesday. And I think that this is of grave concern for the United States. It's grave concern because they have this fear and it comes to peace. China has rhetorically taken off the gloves, right? And they did that a couple of weeks ago when they released this document about U.S. hegemony. I don't remember what was called, the perils of U.S. hegemony, something like that. And they said something to the effect of, if you read the entire document, it was that the United States has been up to no good for a long time, and they're just raising hell and doing all kinds of terrible things in the world and killing people and overthrowing governments, and pretty much statements of fact, right? And they took off the gloves at that point. They said, we've been trying to be friends with these bastards, but they don't want to do it, so be it, right? And the United States was like, oh, I guess it's war. And they're like, well, in a sense. And the sense is that China is launched I would argue, an intellectual and diplomatic confrontation with U.S., where the U.S., the knuckle dragging apes in the Biden administration, they know nothing but brutality. They know nothing but the world of claws and fangs, right? Where the Chinese understand the importance of diplomacy and geopolitical strategy. So, of course, they made their move in the Middle East, and made a move. It has not brought stability yet, but it has the potential to dramatically stabilize the Middle East. And that is their deal between Saudi Arabia, not just Saudi Arabia, to be quite frank, between the Sunnis and the Shia, the Arabs and the Persian, because Bahrain, UAE, all of these countries are coming around saying, hey, you know what, we're kind of down with this. And they're seeing the instability of Europe of Israel. So they figure they better get on board with trying to stabilize their segment of the Middle East as best they can. So the China had one of the greatest um, diplomatic successes in many, many, many years. If you think about President Nixon opening, going to China, things of that nature, and you see what happened after that. He went to China, and the system took him out. He was set up. He was totally set up for making friends with China, with the evil red China. So they have this grand diplomatic success, and it's clear. Two things are clear. Number one, they're good. The Chinese diplomats are good. They are good at what they do. And here's one other thing that's clear. Blinken and those idiots are bad. They're real bad at what they do. And that China was able to execute this brilliant diplomatic feat. And the U.S. intelligence didn't even see it coming. They did it right in front of their face. It was executed in plain view. But the U.S. intelligence didn't see it coming, had no clue it was coming until they got smacked upside the head with it, right? Okay, so I say all that to go to this. So as Xi goes to meet with Putin, there is, I would suspect, significant fear that if the Chinese can do that, if they can execute that kind of a diplomatic feat, and we don't know anything about it, God knows what they're going to be able to do with Putin. Now, I'm going to throw I'm going to throw something, a word, for the neocons, a worst case scenario. I'm not saying this is it. This is pure speculation, but it's a really bad case scenario for them, and it would look like this. Not saying that this is it. Not saying that there's any chance of this happening, but here's a worst case scenario that if I'm the neocons, I'm afraid of. Xi goes to Putin. Now, keep in mind something. The foreign minister of China has been in Moscow working on some deals. Everything I read tells me that there are deals that have been finalized, and that these two people are going to kind of ceremonially, in a way, sign off on them, that these deals have been worked on by brilliant diplomats. They've been ironed out, and that these are the two people that are coming together to, shake hands and sign off on them. Here's a couple, let me throw a couple possibilities at you. Possibility one, and that's a big one that people are thinking, they sign off on a military alliance. Straight out. A lot of people don't feel that that'll happen, and I don't really, but it would be irresponsible if I didn't throw that out as a possibility. Possibility one, military alliance. And China signs off and says, look, now I would say this, there is a de facto military alliance already. The Russians and Chinese have been sailing around Japan with ships and subs and stuff like that. They just did Russia and China did naval exercises with the South Africans, which showed, hey, the Africans kind of like us and they don't like you gringos, take a hike. They've done naval exercises recently in the Persian Gulf, in the Gulf of Oman, with Russia, China, and Iran. So there is already a de facto military alliance, right? De facto being, in fact, if not in actual formal existence, right? But there is speculation that they could do a formal military alliance, that they could say, look, here's where we are now. These gringos are crazy. And I'm using that just for fun. And I don't mean the gringos. What I really mean is the neocons. I don't mean the United States or the culture of the U.S. or the people here or nothing. The people here aren't crazy, but Biden and his flock of morons are. So they could literally say, look, we're signing a military alliance, and here's what we're doing. Our militaries are going to be somewhat integrated, not integrated completely, but somewhat. And in fact, if you attack Russia, China reserves the right to join in the fight. If you attack China, Russia, it wouldn't say that they must or they will. That's now, again, I guess I could throw that out there as it's speculatory. I would be irresponsible if I didn't. So if in fact they did a military alliance, there could be various degrees of the military alliance. One degree could be, if you attack Russia, you attack China, you attack China, you attack Russia, we go to war. You go to war with one, you go to war with all. Another one, and they could add Iran. They could add who knows who with that. They could potentially do that. Another would be a military alliance that says, similar to Article 5, their version of Article 5 in the NATO alliance agreement. the Article 5 basically says if you attack one, it doesn't say they all have to attack. And they're all automatically involved. It says they can come together and they can discuss with the country that's been attacked, and they can evaluate, what the best move is, and they can all come in. But it doesn't even the Article 5 doesn't guarantee it. So they could write their version of Article 5 and say if you attack Russia or China, the other entity, or they could add other countries. They could then say the other entity will then meet with the entity that's been attacked and evaluate it and see whether or not they want to join it, and that they can and will provide material support to the other one, and blah, 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 right? So they could write some version of an Article 5, and they could put various degrees of assistance in it. The bottom line would be that at that point, it changes the game, because the U.S. is screaming all of this about, oh, if we fight China in the sea, in the sea, then in the South China Sea, and all the missiles will fly, and this will happen, or that'll happen. You fight China and Russia with the technology that Russia has, with the Kinzhal and Zircon missiles, with what they, with the sea submarine force that they have. Things ain't gonna work out well for you. Things are going to work out well for you, because if you got in a war with China, because here's one of the things that they keep talking about. If we got in a war with China, the first week this would happen. Well, what the hell would happen the second week? Number one. And what happens if you get your ass kicked the first week, which is quite possible? And then the second week, now you've got to bring supplies 7,000 miles to the area of China. And if it's Russia and China, you got some of the best submarines in the world floating between you, 7,000, 6,000, how many thousand miles in it. You got to get through submarines with Zircon missiles all over the place. You don't know where they are, and they're Russians, and they got missiles with 1,000-mile range. Anywhere within 1,000 miles of that ship, of those submarines, and your ships are blown to hell, which means you cannot possibly resupply those ships with men or material, which means if it's Russia and China, that war is over. What are you going to do? You go to war with Russia, with China, and missiles rain down on all of your bases in the Pacific area, so they all get blasted to hell. But if Russia and China are both in war, that means every one of your missiles in the European theater also gets destroyed, which would mean if you go to war with China or Russia, I'm just saying, if in fact, this is all speculation, if in fact there was a mutual defense pact signed, it would mean if you go to war with Russia and China, day one, every one of your bases in the European theater would be turned to rubble. Every one of your bases in the Pacific theater would be turned to rubble, and you wouldn't be able to resupply them, because there'd be Zircon hypersonic missiles that go like 12,000 miles an hour, lurking, waiting for anything that left the United States shore that even looked like a military transport that was heading in that direction. And where can you go with how do you project your aircraft carriers with Zircon missiles, 10, 12,000 mile an hour missiles that you have admittedly no way to defend? So bottom line, here's what I'm saying. Again, it's all speculation, but if they signed a concrete mutual defense pact, that would mean the United States, to go to war with China, to go to war with Russia, would guarantee a loss very, very quickly. It's not feasible for the U.S. to go to war with both Russia, with two superpowers of that, to go to war with either of them. Because keep in mind something, this is important. If the U.S. was to go to war with Russia, they got to go to Russia's border to fight them. If the U.S. was to go to war with China, they got to go to China's border to fight them. None of them have to come to our border, which means they have to get stuff to Russia's border. They got to get troops. They got to get war material to China's border, which means if China or Russia can disrupt the shipping lanes between here and thither and yon, then you can't get stuff there. And you're in a world of deep and serious trouble within a week or two when you start running out of stuff. And that's what would happen. So God knows if you put the two of them together, China has a pretty significant size navy, naval assets, very large navy and naval assets. While Russia doesn't have the size navy, the technology is their submarines are, some of the finest, on at least as good as the US and some better. And the technology of their missiles far surpasses the technology of the US missiles because we don't have hypersonic missiles. So that kind of a pact would say it's it's suicide. At that point, if they sign that mutual defense pact, it's suicide for the US. It's the end of the US empire to go to war with any of them because you lose that war quickly, which means what do you do? Do you go to immediately to nuclear, which means suicide? Because now you would have Russia and China. Not the, Russia could wipe out, turn the United States to rubble in no time flat because they have hypersonic uh, um, nuclear missiles. So, and you got China over there loaded with for bear with nuclear missiles. So the bottom line is this: to go to war with Russia and China is suicide. You lose it conventionally very quick, and if you go nuclear, you get turned to rubble very quick. The bottom line is, if they sign that, that means to go to war with Russia or China is to swallow a suicide pill. You would just as well just take a gun and put it to your head and pull the trigger, because that's what you're essentially doing. So I'm not saying Russia and China is going to do that. I'm not saying they're not. I'm saying the US has to be speculating that they will. And therefore, that's why the now let me that's one. That's why they're going with Putin. Let me give you another scenario, and that is the one for the Ukraine peace. Ukraine peace. And this is another reason that the US is in fear that something could potentially happen with that meeting. What that would be is this. China and Russia have been working on a deal. Basically, China's saying to Russia, look, what could you take and what could you give away to have a peace deal? What can you give away? What can you take? A lot of people in the world want a peace deal. We want to know what's realistic for you. You give a little bit. There's probably some things you don't want to give up, but your people may not be happy with this, but peace will work for everybody. And what is it that you must have, right? So if we could give away, and last but not least, you can't trust the neocons. What guarantees do you have? How could we go about guaranteeing a peace deal? So the Russians and the Chinese sit down and they iron it out. And the Russians say, we got to have these lands. We got to have this up to here. We got to have Ukraine can't have this, blah, 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 blah. Right. And they say, but we could leave Zelensky in power, something like that. We may not like it. We could guarantee there will be no charges, no actions taken. We'll guarantee the safety of Zelensky and his people and his insiders, blah, blah, blah. Something that they may not be happy with, something that their people may not be happy with. But, let's face it, if you understand diplomacy, you got to get a deal, you got to give something up you're not happy with. And you got to take some things the other side ain't happy with. And you got to say, how can we end it? So bottom line is this. I suspect if I'm right on this one, again, all speculation, there'd be a peace deal that some people some Russian people would hang their head and say, darn, why did we do this? And the answer would be to get a peace deal, right? So this last scenario, they come up with a deal. And the Chinese say, all right, Russians, we've worked this out. You can take this. It's going to be a bitter pill to swallow, but you're going to get the stability you need. Right? You're going to get the stability you need on your border. And Russia says, Putin, his people, Lavrov, we'll bite the bullet and take this one. But because it gives us the stability we need, we will bite the bullet on this one because we get some things we need, right? And I would imagine it would also include some of the demands that were made by Russia prior to the conflict. I'm not going to call it a special military operation, an invasion. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's a conflict, a military conflict regarding the expansion of NATO, because clearly the Russians knew NATO is being expanded so that they can do bad things to our country, and we've got to have a guarantee that this thing stops. And that it retreats. So it would involve taking some of the stuff out, NATO backing off of their border somewhat, right? So China comes up with a deal, a peace deal. That's not too bad, right? Saves face for a lot of people Yeah, the Russians get their security they need, but maybe the people in Russia get a little pissed at Putin, say you're giving away too much. You got a good deal. Let me tell you something about international strategic geopolitics. You got a good deal when both sides are a little pissed. When the two top guys sign it and the people behind them in Russia say you gave away too much. And the people in the US get pissed off and NATO says you gave away too much. When everybody says you gave away too much, you probably got a fair deal. You don't want, it one way or the other. So here's the bottom line. On this big fear. China writes, and this is one, again, speculation. China writes up a deal with Russia, and Russia says, we'll take that. If you can get that deal, we'll sign off on that. So Russia signs off and says, we will take this deal. China then has a peace deal that has been signed off by Russia. China then goes to the UN Security Council. China then goes to the Court of International Opinion, right? China goes to the Africans and say, what do you think about this, man? And the Africans say, we're down. And think about this. The Africans who let's face it, let's be honest about this. The Africans felt that they were abused and mistreated by the countries of Europe and by the colonial powers of Europe. And they felt that there was a level of racism. Let's face it, some of them were snabbed into slavery and things of that nature. So from the Africans' perspective, the Chinese and the Russians, and they've even said it, they treat us like equals, right? So the Africans, the Chinese, and the Russians speak to some of the African leaders and say, hey guys, man, we see you guys as equals. We see you as part of the international discussion. What do you think of it? And the Africans say, okay, we can deal with that, which would probably already been done. They go to the Muslim countries and show them the decency and respect that they should. And they say to the Muslim countries, hey, man, Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, what do you guys think of this deal? And the Muslim countries say, we could vote for that in the UN, right? They go to Latin America, the indigenous people of Latin America, the various countries of Latin America. Hey, what do you think? Mexico, right on Russia's border. And they say, yeah, that looks like a good deal. We need some peace. That'll bring us some safety. Right? Asian countries. Hey, what do you think? So they go around the world and they get the numbers. And the people all say, man, that's a good deal. Right? So they get the Russians to sign off on a peace deal. They get countries around the world to say, we'll vote for that at the UN. They go to the UN Security Council and say, we'd like the UN Security Council to bless this. And they say to the US empire, we got a deal. Here's a peace deal. The Russians have signed off on it. All over Africa, they're cheering. They're in the streets saying, hooray. I'm being facetious. The Muslim countries have said, we're down with this. It's going to make all of our lives better. The Latin American people said, oh boy, maybe we won't have a nuclear war afterwards. And we can, and it's going to involve getting rid of the sanctions, right? It's going to involve getting rid of the sanctions. And they say, okay, great. We got a peace deal. The weight of the entire world is behind this peace deal. And the Russians have already signed off on it. The Russians want peace. The world wants, the Africans want peace. The Muslims want peace. The Latino indigenous people of South America want peace. The Asians, everybody wants peace. Do you want peace, America? Sign on a dotted line. Now, we already know what that would actually be. And that's important. This is critical because it would be the destruction of the neocon project. It would be the destruction of U.S. imperialism because the U.S. empire's plan, of course, we all know, is to rule the world. That's what you do if you're an empire and you're a neocon. You got to rule the world, right? And what do you want to do? And it would also be bringing safety to China because, of course, we know the neocons' plan. Go after Russia, weaken Russia, break up Russia, weaken, and it would also be great for Europe, might I add, weaken Europe and weaken Russia all in one fell, economically just destroy Russia and destroy Europe's economy altogether, right? Those are two threats the neocons view to themselves, weaken and subordinate both of them, highly subordinate. They've had great success with Europe and they've weakened and they've subordinated them, but not so much with Russia. So if this happens, what would happen at that point? The neocon plan to weaken Russia is gone. To take Russia out, no hope of it. This ends it. And the whole world says, no, this ain't going to work for us. Meanwhile, guess what happens? Ironically, it saves Europe too, because the sanctions are gone and Europe's economy can wake back up and get going again. And they can get cheap because the sanctions are gone. And Germany and Russia can rebuild. See what I mean? It's a world saving event if they do it, to do put that on the table. And they can make all of those arguments. Guys, look what happens. Think of the good thing if we do this. So they lay this on the table, but it wipes out the neocon project. At that point, you're not destroying Europe. You're not destroying Russia. And what's the point of going after China now? How do you do that? Now that Russia's just as strong as ever and Europe's waking back up. And when Europe's economy wakes back up, and now you say to Europe, good news, Europe. Yeah, now that we got that deal signed and your economy's strong, yeah, your number one trading partner is China. You know, Germany, 38% of BMW sales are in China. 40% of Mercedes-Benz are in China. And now that we've totally screwed you and wiped out your economy, and now that your economy can wake back up because you can get cheap energy again, yeah, we're going to go do the same thing with China. That ain't going over big in Europe, trust me. So you have effectively ended the neocon project. So they had to try this weak, ragged flim flam ahead of the Xi Putin meeting to try to stop this from happening. Now, remember, I'm speculating potentially the things that could happen. But a peace plan that was signed off by Russia, that was, and remember, the Russians and the Chinese diplomats are all over the place. Let me add something else. Don't, as George Bush would say, misunderestimate this. Very recently, Bashar al-Assad was in Moscow. A whole bunch of Muslim leaders from Muslim countries were in Moscow. What if that was part of it? What if part of this was that prior to the Xi, people are all talking about the Muslim leaders in Moscow just from the perspective of the deal that that China was able to get, and how they could work with Turkey, and how they could probably Syria, maybe they could bring detente between Syria and Turkey, and how they could work out what's going on in the Middle East. But what if they were brought in to say, look, part of this thing is we need a deal. We need a deal. In your countries are dealing with a lot of problems. You're dealing with a lot of inflation and instability and things of that nature. What if we were able to get a deal in here? We're able to get a deal in Ukraine, and then guess what you got coming? You got grain coming. You got all kinds of things. And if you do that, we'll guarantee you X, because Russia and China are powerful countries. They got money. They got commodities. They can then say to these Muslim countries, if you get on board with this peace plan, guess what we can give you? And they got things they can give them to make their lives much better and make them more secure and economically secure, right? So I suspect that these other meetings prior to the Xi Putin meeting in Moscow, that included the foreign ministers of like Iran, I believe Turkey, the UAE, let's just say this, a number of Muslim countries have been in Moscow over the last couple of weeks meeting, some directly with Putin. I suspect that these meetings are not unrelated. I think that's a double negative. That's probably bad grammar, but you get my point. It would be easier to say this. I suspect that those meetings are related. Yeah, that sounds much better. Are related to the upcoming meeting with Xi. That all of these things going on, because that's how diplomats work. Now, Tony Blinken and Kamala Harris are in Africa right now, after threatening the Africans, after saying, we put together this plan called the Countering Russian Malevolent Something in Africa Act, which says that the U.S. basically, that if African countries do business with Russia, that the U.S. is going to sanction them. So it's the same old colonialist, racist, controlling crap against the African countries. And the African countries are just pushing farther and further away from that stuff, as Russia and China are there saying, hey, let's make an economic deal. So Blinken, I don't know if you've been following this, Blinken and Kamala Harris are in China running around smiling with their hands out. The African people can see through that. It's mafia. It's organized crime that comes to your house and says, Uh, comes to your new restaurant, says, if you were to give us 25% of your profits, there's been a lot of fires and you probably won't have a fire. You know good and damn well they're the ones that are going to set the fire. So bottom line is this: they know that the arsonists are in Africa. Blinken and Kamala Harris are the arsonists, and the people in Africa know that the arsonists are in town. And they're not thinking, how can we make a deal with Blinken and Kamala Harris? They're thinking, how the hell soon can we get these bastards off our continent? Because they're coming around here and it ain't going to work out well for us. It never does. So I suspect that there's a lot of wheeling and dealing, that the Chinese are not done. They ain't done. The Chinese are ramping up diplomacy big time. And while the knuckle draggers in the U.S. State Department are like, how can we force the Chinese? How can we put more missiles around China? How can we force it? The Chinese are like, all right, we're going to the Middle East and we're going to bring some stability there, and we're going to make a deal that's going to shock the world. Next, we're going to Africa. And we're going to show up in South America. We're going to make a deal with Venezuela. We're going to make a deal with Cuba. We'll come economic deal right on your border with Cuba. And it's not going to involve bringing in any missiles, any war, anything like that. No, we would never do that. We're not involved in violence. They're going to do diplomatic and economic. You're going to see Russia and China do a Cuban missile crisis without missiles. It's going to be a Cuban food crisis. It's going to be a Cuban technology crisis. It's going to be a Cuban financial crisis where Russia and China are flooding money, and they're flooding technology, and they're flooding education and things like that into Cuba and into Mexico. You see, the U.S. goes to Ukraine, the U.S. goes to Taiwan, and it says, we're going to flood missiles, we're going to flood weapons, we're going to flood violence into your border. What happens if Russia and China says, fine, we're going to go to Mexico, we're going to go to Cuba, and we're going to flood things into your border, but it's not going to be anything that what are you going to say? You don't want the people of Mexico to have education and wheat, and you don't want them to develop their oil or whatever kind of lithium, whatever the hell they got. You don't want the Cubans to develop their tourism. We're just there to build hotels and do things and blah, 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 blah. And have them use the Russian mirror card and be able to go around the SWIFT and do deals with them. We're going to buy Cuban cigars and all those kinds of things. So I suspect that what you're seeing is the knuckle dragging monkeys. Well, you know what? Let me say this. That's unfair to monkeys. And it's to call them knuckle dragging apes. The violent and vicious and brutal neocons, the amoral brutal neocons, the psychotic neocons who go around the world using violence, using starvation and economic coercion to try to force people to do things, have finally met their match. And their match says two words: stability and justice. Stability, the Middle East. Stability, we're going to make your region more stable. Justice, African people, you know as well as I know, the whole world knows that the colonial powers have treated you in a racist way. We know that. Let's not pretend they haven't. And you want it to be treated in a just way. We're now going to give you economic opportunity, and we're not going to overthrow your countries and kill your people and do all these terrible things and steal your gold and steal your diamonds. How about we just do business deals? And the African people, man, they got the natural resources in Africa. So they say that fair enough, let's do business deals. They say to Latin America, we're familiar with the Monroe Doctrine of 1824, where the U.S. says nobody can have a military alliance with you or any other kind of alliance. Well, we don't need a military alliance with you. Don't need to do it. But what we do need to do is to build up your economic strength so that you can stand on your own 2 feet. Let's do that. And they got a lot of natural resources there. And guess what? What's the U.S. going to say? Well, how dare you go to Nicaragua and help them build a bridge, or support their new mines or something like that? Or are we going to go to war because somebody's building a bridge in Nicaragua, or a new canal, or buying, helping develop, hospitals or power plants or something in Cuba? We're going to go to war. How dare you help the Cuban people have electricity 24 hours a day? I think you're going to see them challenge the edges. And this is the Putin-Xi meeting. Keep an eye on this. This is a big one. And the U.S. tried this ham-handed preemptive strike. What a waste of time. All right. So there we go. I'm going to make an effort as best I can to go to the top. And let's see. if we've got not a lot of super chats, but there's some here. All right, we're going to start with Medea Benjamin, perhaps super sticker. Thanks a lot, Medea. No, I don't think that's Medea Benjamin. Good old Honeybell. Thank you very much, Honeybell. See if some of our people, sometimes we get some good questions. American politics. Good afternoon from Belgium. Wow, good old Belgium. We get some great questions. Hey, Garland, is the U.S. melting down yet? Bad dude corn pop. Here's another thing I'll throw in there. If we were to get a peace deal, it could save the banks too, because when you get rid of those sanctions, it would open the door for really some significant. There would be what would happen is you would get the world. It would wake up the world economy a lot, and you would get the. I believe it would help the supply chain dramatically, and it would help the inflation. I need to do a show on inflation anyway, because I think so many people have it wrong on the idea that you have to. I'm going to say, let me mention, talk on. I'm not going to go with so long, but I got to say something on inflation. And thank you, bad dude corn pop. That was a question that brought this to mind. I need to do a whole thing on economics, but I'll talk about this. An economist, I'm not, but I've read, me, I'm well read. I've read books on economics, blah, 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 blah. I've got sitting behind me. I'll guarantee I can find, look at that. The Lords of Creation. The Lords of Creation is interesting because it talks about the super rich from the very beginning of, and how they got to control everything and all that. Capitalism hits the fan. Professor Richard Wolff, good art. So I'm going to guarantee you that if I go through my books, just the ones here, I got lots of others. There's books that I have read on economics. I'm an economist, I'm not, but I read a lot of books on a lot of stuff, and it helps. There is an error in good faith when it comes to inflation. Here's the error. Conventional thinking is this. In order to stop inflation, you must raise interest rates. Raising interest rates will stop inflation. I'm not going to go long on this and get into why that's believed and why under some circumstances it is accurate. I will simply say this. In the current circumstances we find ourselves in economically, that belief is inaccurate. You see, what that addresses is demand. It suppresses demand. In suppressing demand, you slow up the rate of inflation. Now, let's see how I'm going to put this. Two things. The current inflation crisis is based on supply chain issues, right? The demand is there. I want to buy things, but I can't get them because they're not here yet, right? They're not here yet. I can't get them. There's supply issues. Now, some of it is also based on the fact that a lot of money was printed in the last several years. But the fact of the matter is, there's huge issues with the supply chain, moving the stuff, getting the stuff here. People want to buy stuff. It's not here. That's kind of starting to wait and change a little bit, but there's significant issues in the supply chain. And raising interest rates doesn't address that. And if, as an example, if 70% of the problem is on the side of supply and 30% is on the side of demand, which some argue that it's much higher, then simply raising interest rates ain't going to address it. Now, that's one thing about it. So raising interest rates is not really going to affect the greatly affect the issue of inflation. But there's something else that's also critical here. To argue that the Fed is raising interest rates to lower inflation implies that the Fed is acting in good faith. Which anytime you believe that, you better take your head and go slam it into an oak tree somewhere, because the Fed ain't acting in good faith. Think about this. This is important. And I'm saying all this based on my kind of research of things. The Fed is not acting to lower inflation. What does the Fed know will happen? Remember, the Fed only has one tool, right? It can only address demand. But what can the Fed do? It can drive us into a recession, right? Now, there's something else going on along with inflation that I believe the Fed, who is not acting in good faith, is acting to address. What is that? Wages are going up. Wages are increasing. McDonald's used to be able to pay people $7 an hour, and now people are saying I won't work for under 15, 18, $19 an hour. Now McDonald's can still make a profit, but they got to actually pay people. And if you think about this, this is the calculation when it comes to economics, right? If you work at McDonald's, just going to use that, you work at a store, you work in a factory, and based on your labor, based on your input, that company makes $100 for every hour you work. The question is this: how much, and I'll say in profit, that takes everything into account, right? So that takes in how much it costs for material and all the things they got to pay. They make $100 for every hour that you work. The question becomes, how much out of that do you get? The lesser they pay you, the greater their profit. So they want the profit margin. Therefore, if they got to pay you $8 an hour, right, that means they make $92 profit for every hour. But now if they got to pay you $18 an hour, things change in a bit. Really, now they make $82 for every hour that you work. And the greedy corporations want all they want. If you bring them $100 worth of profit, they want $101. I mean, if you bring them $100 worth of income for an hour, they want $101. They want all of it and then some. So as wages, now keep in mind something, this is well known. For what has happened, what neoliberalism has done over the past several decades is kept your wages the same and increased their profits. So as they make more money, before they were making $50 for every hour you work. Now they're making $150 for every hour you work, right? But they're paying you the same. So they're making 3 times as much for every hour you work, but you're making the same, which means their profits are dramatically increased. This is inarguable. All of the statistics clearly show this, right? So the Fed was not, while the Fed said, listen, this is what we're doing. We are raising interest rates to address inflation, which would mean that the feds were acting on behalf of the people. It was acting to make your life better. Inflation is hurting you on a day-to-day basis, and we're acting to make your life better. Now, keep in mind something. This inflation was doing what? It was also allowing companies to price gouge. A lot of companies had no additional bills, but everything was going up. And I got a company, I'm like, everything's going up. I don't have anything additional. I'll raise my prices 25%. Why? Because because of inflation. When people say, my God, you used to charge us $1, now you're charging us $1.25. Inflation, sorry. So it was really for a lot of corporations that didn't have additional costs, they would simply price gouge. They would use inflation as an excuse to make more money, right? So everybody's eating, man. The rich people are getting richer. This neoliberal thing is working. So at that point, but they got a problem. They got a problem. And the problem they have is wages are going up. And I'll make this quick. One of the reasons is because during the lockdowns and during COVID, a lot of people who could retire did retire. Like everybody could retire, retired. They had a big chunk of people who left the working group, the people of the labor force, shall we say, right? And so you had a big hole in the labor force because now you got a lot of retired people that said, I can retire, I'm retired. And now the labor force needs more people. And what happens? Naturally, labor needs people. Now the dynamics of power has shifted on behalf of the working class, and the working class can determine more money, demand more money, and they need more money because of inflation. So this thing all is kind of working itself out in an odd kind of way. The Fed says, what we're doing is we're acting in good faith on behalf of the people. So we're going to raise interest rates so that we can lower inflation for the people. We're standing for the people. We're the Fed. That's what we do. Well, that ain't what they do. So if you believe that, you know, I got a bridge to sell you between Manhattan and Brooklyn, right? No, the Fed is not acting on behalf of the people. Why did the Fed raise interest rates? To cause a economic slowdown and create a recession. What does a recession give you? Massive layoffs. And what does massive layoffs means? That means you change the dynamic. You now have more people out of work looking for a job. And what happens now? The dynamic is switched. And so now the people who own the corporation say, before everybody was out here and we needed to search for people to work for us. Now all these people have been laid off. They're searching for a job. We can pay them less. The reason the feds And I think I explained that clearly. The reason the feds actually raised interest rates was to cause a recession, to reverse the labor dynamics so that they would lower the cost of labor for corporations and increase profits. That's what that was about. It was lowering labor. It had nothing to do with inflation. Absolutely nothing to do with inflation, because they knew it wouldn't address inflation, because inflation was caused by supply chain issues mostly, as opposed to being charged by demand. People wanted to buy stuff. I want to buy a new lawnmower. Sorry, we won't have any in. Like, I live like, on the bay, right? And I live right here, in an area where there's water and there's, I don't live, my house is not on the water, but I can walk to, you can ride a bicycle fairly quickly right down to so boating and, I have friends who boat, and everybody I know is boating and fishing and things like that, right? It's a normal thing. And try to go buy a new outboard motor, right? Hey, I want to buy a new outboard motor. I want to buy a 250. Yeah, we've got a 12-month wait if you're lucky. Oh, I want, a new motor for my, a new parts for a boat. Some of these things are a year out. Right? People have the money to buy stuff and want to buy it, but it's not available. Supply chain, that's causing inflation. Now, what happens? The outboard motor company says, look, I can't get the motors out in time. What's going to happen to them when there's scarcity? Right? In capitalism, what is scarcity, which is often artificial? Scarcity makes prices go up, right? So you got a supply chain issue causing inflation, causing things to be more expensive, and creating an opportunity for greedy bastards to raise prices and do price gouge. They raising interest rates ain't touching that. Not happening that. But I understand, because conventional economic thinking is you raise interest rates to what? To lower inflation. However, you must take into account the particular individual circumstances. In this instance, the cause of inflation means that raising interest rates ain't going to happen. And it wasn't. And as I said, you would also have to assume that the reason the Fed was acting would be to lower inflation in our best interest. When you understand the Fed is never acting in the best interest of the working class, then you know they are not acting in good faith. They're doing it to screw the working class. Whose interest does the Fed act in? The Fed acts in interest of the oligarchs and the powerful. In that instance, when you understand that the Fed does not act in the interest of the working class, that they always act in the interest of the powerful and the wealthy, then you understand that they have to be acting in that interest right now. That means that they're raising interest rates, what? To create a recession, to create massive layoffs, and to change the dynamic in which the labor force has the advantage. And now people can go to McDonald's and say, look, I want $15 an hour. And McDonald's are like, we got to have people. We got to pay them whatever you ask, because otherwise we can't stay in business. Boom. Wiped out, massive layoffs. Now you got 10 people waiting for McDonald's, and McDonald's says, we're back to paying you $9 an hour. And there's 10 people standing there saying, please give it to me first. That's all that was about. Stop believing that the Fed is acting in good faith. Stop believing that the Fed is acting to alleviate economic pain on the working class. You are naive if you believe that. As long as you understand that the Fed is acting, the Fed is owned by like Goldman Sachs and JCPenney. You think they're acting for you? I'm sorry, you're naive. The Fed is acting on behalf of the oligarchs. They're acting to relieve the issue of high paying of the demand, labor demand, so that they can pay less and they can continue to price gouge, because that's a big part. That's as much of it as anything. There's a combination of supply chain, and some of the supply chain stuff is easing. Not all of it. Some of it is easing, but it still creates an opportunity for price gouging, and that's what they're doing. All right. Wow, that was a whole lot. So yes, there's the U.S. melting down yet. All right, man, that was too much. This thing's getting too long. People are going to stop listening to me if I keep running my yak for 2 hours at a time. All right, we got to finish the super chats. God, I appreciate you, honest man with a microphone and where. Well, thank you, conscientious Gentile. Sparky says, worked in various sketchy areas at night around the state. Was often pulled over by law enforcement for tag lighting, even though it wasn't. A convenient probable cause to check on strange 2 a.m. cars. Absolutely. Absolutely. You are correct, Sparky. Okay, how about we check? Sparky again says, I imagine that Russia and China will stay away from a written alliance and let it evolve as mutual culture. West proof paperwork meaningless anyhow. I think you're probably right. But as a strategic analyst, I would have been wrong not to at least provide that as a possibility. Now, I don't think it's going to happen. I'm with you, Sparky. Sparky's sharp now. Listen to Sparky. Good old Sparky's a sharp person. So yeah, I'm with you. But I think I had to evaluate that as a possibility. Ralph, thanks a lot, Ralph. Cramden, maybe. Sorry, Garland. Russia can't make more Minsk deals. I certainly agree with you with you there. Now, keep in mind something, a conscious Gentile. I'm not going to get into Zen, but there's okay, let me make this quick. I'll talk about Zen, a Zen perspective. You know, the discussion of the 10 Commandments from the perspective of Zen, right? There is a term, I forgot what it is. There are people, but here's what it means. The Christian belief is that this certain depends on what sect you're in, right? Of Abrahamic religions, but there's this belief. Forget that. There's a belief that the 10 Commandments were given to people so that they would have to follow them, right? And then now there's a Zen Buddhist, whatever you want to call it, perspective that says God gave people the 10 Commandments not because for them to follow them, but to prove that they can't, right? And there's a term for that in Zen, and I forgot what it is. And that is, you know, you tell someone to do this. It's this. Someone comes to the Zen master and says, Zen Master Garland, what do I need to do? And Zen Master Garland says you need to get rid of desire. That's your problem. You desire things. You need to be in the moment, and you need to stop desiring things. So then the student goes away from Zen Master Garland, and he says, I'm flogging desire. I'm beating desire. I'm cutting the throat of desire. I'm burning desire. I'm destroying desire. I'm wasting out desire. And then he comes back to the Zen Master Garland, and he goes, I've got a problem. And I say, what is that, student? And he says, I'm desiring to get rid of desire. Now, I didn't send the person away to get rid of desire. I didn't tell them you need to get rid of desire because they get rid of desire. I needed to tell them to get rid of desire to prove that they couldn't, right? Now, you see where I'm going here? So what happens, and think about this, Putin's a black belt. Think about this. This is Asians. This is the whole, you know, that types of philosophy, martial arts philosophy, etc. Right? What if I do that? Why do I do all of that? If I'm going to go forth this peace deal, if I'm going to get the Russians to do it, if I'm going to get everybody on board with it, I'm not bringing that peace deal to the neocons to show that they'll sign them, because they ain't. I'm doing it to show to the rest of the world that they won't. I'm revealing who they are. Think about the brilliance of that, right? Think about playing 3D chess, as we call it, playing 3D chess. I call it just, you know, a Zen perspective. You don't do something, you don't make an offer to a person, you don't give advice to a person because they'll do it or they can do it. You give advice to a person to demonstrate to them that it's not possible for them to do it. So now you do all of this work to create this deal. Russia signs everybody, Africa, the UN, you take it to the UN. And when you take it to the UN, what's got to happen? The US has to veto it. The UN Security Council looks at it. Russia, France, blah, 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 UN have to veto it. Now, you do all of this not to get the peace deal passed, but to demonstrate to the world that the United States is not acting in good faith, to expose that the neocons are not trying to bring peace and security and stability to the European continent, that they're trying to destroy it. That this is not Putin invaded a sovereign country because he's evil. This is part of a grander plan of the neocons. You do that to expose the plan, not because they will do it, but to expose that they won't. Think about that, conscious Gentile. Man, I love the questions here. They're so awesome. Are there any more questions in the super chat? Oh. Chicka boom boom always has great stuff. Says when the U.S. has to put a gun to the heads to force countries to side with them, they've already lost. Absolutely correct. Brilliant. Abdi Yamatahari, super sick. Thanks you, Abdi. I'm sure I butchered your name. Here we go. Tabarnak says Russia would gain access to a 1,000,000-man volunteer army, and China would have the nuclear deterrence to sink some ships. Stalemate its victory. I agree. Eric Suarez, Mexican president, spoke very clearly against the United States harassment yesterday during our commemoration of oil nationalization. Whoa, man, that's awesome. Thank you, Eric Suarez. Eric Suarez has a great book about about competition keeps inflation down too. Well, keep in mind something, Sparky. People pretend as though inflation is only caused by one thing, right? It depends on what causes inflation. That's like saying that person has a headache. Well, what's going to fix the headache? Well, it all depends on what caused the headache. See, we're given simple answers to complicated questions. Hey, you know what? If you drink lots of water, it'll make your headache go away. In some circumstances, it's true. If you have a migraine, if you have drinking coffee and high caffeine will make headaches go away. And there's some instances, such as a migraine, where that can help. Just taking a couple of Advil will make the headache go. It depends. What if the headache is caused by a brain tumor? What if the headache is caused by high blood pressure? Do you see what I mean? So when we say what keeps inflation down, we're given the simple answer. It always raising interest rates. Well, raising interest, who benefits from raising interest rates? Most of the time, a lot of time, banks do. Now, in this instance, we are not going to have the time to go into how it affected the bond market and why it is slamming the banks. But so my point, Sparky, is this: depends on what caused the inflation as to what will fix it. Depends on what caused the headache as to what will cure the headache. In this instance, the inflation was caused by some abnormal factors, and some of the price increases are not inflation, they're price gouging. You got to take that into account. So I understand what you're saying. In some circumstances, that's true. Chicka boom boom. Garland, what's your thoughts on North Korea recruiting near 800,000 military personnel and Uyghurs and Tibetan joining the PLA military against the U.S.? Well, I don't know if it's true or not. I've read that, I've heard that, but look, in times of military conflict, there's a lot of propaganda. The fact of the matter is this: I think it's less likely. Here's the bottom line: they got nukes, and I think it's less likely that the U.S. attacks a country with nukes. I think that's their saving grace. So I don't know how true it is. We got to keep in mind that there's some level of propaganda that could be true. Inflation: companies are raising prices because they can. Monopoly pricing: listen in on an investor's call and they'll tell you profits are up. There we go. So there's a lot to be said here. How about esoteric teachings? Mitt Romney owns Domino's Pizza. Don't eat it. Thanks. Thanks a lot. How about next we go to Anthony. What's going on with the UAW vote? New labor, please. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't been keeping up on that. I'm sorry. Let's go with John M _ NMN. Adding, companies are using inflation as excuse. Exactly. Sparky, excellent take on Fed's interest rate motivation. Thank you, Sparky. Reginald Morton says, will the neocons suffer domestic fall from grace, or will they retain their leadership positions after suffering multiple defeats to China? Will we see a Nuremberg-style trial for neocons? Good question. I don't know. But there are definitely, man, the neocons are slamming into a brick wall right now, and they're up against people who are their superiors. Diplomatically and intellectually, these people are idiots, and they screwed with the wrong people this time. They're up against their intellectual superiors. All right, so that's a great take. Okay. Anthony says, Witcher says, I have been saying that Russia will accept no peace deal short of unconditional surrender. Will a Chinese peace deal change that? No. Remember what I said? They're not presenting this peace deal because they believe that the neocons are signing it. They're producing. They get the entire world behind this peace deal. Everybody in the world says that's a good deal. We got to go with that. And the neocons are isolated. It is a way of isolating them. Everybody says you got to take that. And even parts of Europe are going to be like, man, we're kind of screwed. I think we need to take this deal. There are going to be voices all over Europe saying, yeah, we got to take this deal. And what's going to happen when the polls in Germany say 70% of the Germans say we got to take this deal? The French, everybody like all over says, man, that ain't a bad deal. And what happens if it ain't a bad deal? If it really ain't a bad deal? And they're like, yeah, the people say we got to take the deal. German people, we got to take the deal. The leaders in Hungary all over, yeah, take the deal. Africa, everybody take the deal. And the neocons are like, we're not taking that deal because Putin. You isolate them from the entire world. You expose them. It's a Zen thing. I don't tell you to do this because you can. I tell you to prove to you that you can. In this instance, I do it to prove to the world that you're not an insincere player, that you're not acting in good faith. It's a brilliant plan. No wonder I came up with it. All right. No, it's not me. It's just Zen, a Zen thing. It's old. All right. Now we go to Rockfin. Lori Lamb, Garland, love your analysis. Thank you, Lori Lamb. You know, I always like a good pat on the back. A pat on the back is 18 inches above a kick in the behind. Great stuff, Garland, as always. Saving it and studying it later. Happy Sunday. And sorry. And that was Tom Hutchinson. And we shall continue. How about Rick Say says, thanks, Garland. Great comment. He thanks you, Rick Say. That's spelled C-E-A. Okay. Vinesh Patel, the neocons own bloody-mindedness in Ukraine, blinded them to everything happening around them. Banking system collapsing, petrodollar left for China. De-dollarization happening as we speak, hyperinflation on its way. I think you are correct, my dear friend. I think you are on the money. Anybody else on Rockfin? I'm looking. Rockfin's great. Okay, I think that's it, guys and girls. I think that's it. And I guess the neoliberals will get mad at me or something because I said guys and girls and I didn't add enough genders or something. But at any rate, here we are. I guess that's it. My God, I've been on an hour and a half. That's too long. Thanks a lot, everybody. Certainly appreciate it. And as I will say, if you enjoyed my commentary, please follow me on Telegram. Patreon.com is certainly a way that you can help the channel by doing a monthly fee, monthly $5, $10, $100, whatever you can. PayPal is certainly another option. You can use PayPal. Buy Me a Coffee is great because you can do Buy Me a Coffee is like $5 each, and you can buy 1, 2, 3, however many coffees, 10 coffees. I've had people that's as much as 10 coffees. And you can also do the monthly, just like Patreon. If you don't like Patreon, because Patreon can be a little on the neoliberal side, you can do it on Buy Me a Coffee. That's great way. And of course, my Cash App information is there. Rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. Let me say this. This is important. People are like, well, Garland, why should we give you money? I'm in the process of putting money together. I'm going to build a studio. And what by that, I mean my home office, which is a former bedroom, is now a home office. And, friggin' desk. And, I'm just a regular old middle-class guy. God knows I'm not a rich man, a retired cop. I'm just not dirt poor. I'm surviving. But there's class consciousness here. I guarantee you that most of the people listening are like me, kind of working class people. Some people have a retirement, some people don't, who are making ends meet, who are surviving. Some of us are a little better off, some of us are better off, some of us are struggling pretty bad. We're all kind of got a oneness here. Not a lot of us are, have $1 million to, run around with a mansion and a yacht. Bottom line is I'm trying to get the money together because I want to make a nice studio. I want to have a nice studio and really upgrade the channel. And so if you can afford to help, that's highly appreciated. Rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. In the event that they throw me off. So that's what all the asking for financial contributions is about. It's not like I'm trying to go out and buy a Stormy Daniels, for God's sake. But my point is, Rockfin.com, in the event that I get thrown off of here, which is quite possible, thrown off of YouTube, Rockfin.com is my backup channel for now. And not even backup, it's really good. It's an alternative platform. How about we say that? Because you can go to Rockfin and there's no advertisements. You can go to Rockfin and you can become and it doesn't cost anything. You can go to Rockfin and you can become a subscriber. To become a subscriber is $14.99 a month if you can afford it. If you can't, don't worry about it. And they give you a couple months free if you sign up for a year. So it's like $12 a month or whatever. And I do a subscriber only show once a week. And that's from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. with Scott Ritter every Wednesday, Eastern Standard Time. So if you can afford to become a subscriber, on Rockfin, that's great. If not, just become a member. You'll see all this stuff and you won't get advertisements. Thanks a lot, everybody. Please do me a favor. Share this on all of your social media platforms. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on where the heck ever. Follow me on Telegram, and my email. If you got something important, I mean, just don't just because I can get a lot of emails. But if you've got something important or whatever, Garland and the letter N at gmail.com. Thanks a lot, everybody. Don't forget, share this. Peace. I'm out.